And Ron and I are sitting very close to each other today.
Today we're very close to each other. For this shot,
we're family.
Yeah.
Yes.
We are. Really, literally in the fight for a more just,
Hildy,
equitable world.
We are super excited to have you. We typically, as our emails indicated, sometimes our conversations are casual and how would we say this?
They can be meandering.
They're meandering and wandering, but that we've had some experiences this week, Ron and I, that fit right into the subject of catalytic thinking. Yes, and so we're excited to learn from you and have a conversation for the next hour or so. So as soon as
I am looking forward to it as well. The more I read your stuff and the questions that you posed, and I was like, wow, I really want to be with these people. So
awesome.
Well, Vu recommended you immediately.
Vu recommended you.
We had a great conversation with Vu. His episodes will be out in a couple of months, actually, but in terms of our chronology of releases. But we had a great conversation with him and follow him religiously in a lot of his writings, and are now doing the same with you too. So we're very excited. Yes.
We're full. So just to give you a little bit more background, these two crazy folks are on a podcast with you. I don't know how much you've watched of it in your copious free time, but we did a really kind of cool, Marybeth did a cool thing with us as a small grassroots nonprofit. She is the CEO of Worcester Community Action Council. She'll tell when we do the introductions, I'm just giving those some back context. And so they had a subcontract with a community-based organization, and that CBO backed out like mid-grant cycle. And so she chose to take that $60,000 and give it to us as a startup grassroots to give us working capital and some runway to be able to start to do our programming on our own. We were about 2 years old. And to that end, she's continued, and the WCAC has continued to be, I don't know, like not a fiscal sponsor because we are our own 501c3, but like a fiscal big brother in a lot of ways, and kind of helps with reimbursement, cash flow issues, and things like that. And so, long story is, it was this disruptive, innovative, we didn't see it happen anywhere type thing that Marybeth did, and it yielded good fruit on our end. We were able to grow and incubate and go from that $60,000 to we're about a $1.25 million organization now.
A short amount of time too. Yeah.
About 4 or 5 years, right? And so we can. Their help catalyzed our growth.
There's the connection. There it is.
And so when we started thinking about that, we started telling that story. And the more that we've done this podcast and we've gotten introduced to more people, we've just found that there are just new and innovative and radical ways that folks are thinking about and
We're
doing
not alone.
stuff. Right.
We're not alone. Yeah.
Well, and this is even more so coming from our municipal meeting we had yesterday.
Yeah.
That was
we can
probably
get into that.
Well, I'm just gonna let her know because Hildy, it was. Listen, could have went on Broadway. That's how good the performance was. There was no substance at all to what was being talked about in that place. I could go on tour with this thing because of how much they were performing.
We're facing, like many places, a very concerning increase in youth violence, and what often happens is that our elected officials tend to start paying attention round about the springtime and bring us together to talk about what we're going to do to solve it, and spend 2 hours not necessarily coming up with an action plan to do that. So there are links to the catalytic thinking and the questions that need to be asked that weren't necessarily asked in that meeting yesterday. But that's kind of, as you've described also in writings, you're a prolific writer, so I couldn't keep up with everything that you've ever written.
And I can't.
But one of the first things I came across was some of your description and just the how to do things and the why and creating those ripples in the pond. And I thought, well, this is what we're trying to do. And from WCAC's perspective, we're a community action agency, one of 1,000 across the U.S. and created during the War on Poverty. And I say to my staff all the time that I'm less interested in running a traditional type of community action program. I'm really trying to shift who's at the center of our work and both in name and also in execution, and really think about where we're putting people first. And I think we're making better stride toward that. We are not perfect at it, but in one aspect is thinking about the relationship that Ron and I have built between our two organizations, with the example that Ron just shared around sort of simple things like cash flow mitigation. Is we as an agency that's larger in the community, we ought to take a better position to be working with other organizations to replicate that and ripple it out a little bit more and create some envy around that, I guess.
And from an advocacy standpoint,
right. Yeah.
The fact that you're right, we talked about the size. So if we speak to an issue, the fact that WCAC will
but not just from our perspective, is that also getting out of the way too. When we need to move out of the way and not be front and center, which we get the benefit of sometimes because we're large and we have really rigorous bureaucratic government structures and governance structures and things like that because we're mostly federally funded. So that has given us.
I would love to know a little bit more, Ron, about your organization, because I understand a community action organization. They're all over the place, as you said.
We're everywhere.
Yeah, sure, no doubt.
Just play with my lighting.
Yeah. And then we'll have to do like the formal introduction, or are we already in? No, my organization, Legendary Legacies. The short story of it, there's no short story to any of this stuff. The shortest story is life experience of my own, and then coming into the nonprofit sector from the for-profit sector, starting a nonprofit because I felt the need, and one of the grants that was funding me at one point was going away. It was working, which we're still funded in part by Hildy, which we were talking about yesterday. It's the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative. Which is really fascinating because we talk about how poor it is, and it's a national model. Anyway, the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative, which I believe the language in the RFP says something to the effect of the top 3% most violent offenders in your community between 17 and 25. And that's determined by law enforcement and their criminal background and some input from community. It's a list-based program in which folks are assigned to it and don't know they're on it. You got to go find them and then provide case management services and support. So up until now, we have been kind of our at the beginning, right? Our work was dictated by the grants. It was the tail wagging the dog because that's what was funding us. In a year 2 or 3, we've been able to come through and have a theory of change and a strategic plan that really tells us how we want to go about doing our work, which is more around building a community and a movement of returning citizens who have done reentry well to be able to go and help that next generation. At the core of what we're looking at is knowing that most of these young men have been failed by multiple systems, and that first system is a familial system. And so if you don't build your organization with the familial components, right, within boundaries that heal some of that hurt little boy inside, you'll never be able to be effective by just telling them what they need to do. I need to create the environment viscerally to help you. In some ways, I see what we end up doing is really reparenting, but you have to help heal the man that's going to go do that for these young men first. And if you don't do that, then you're just going to put trauma on top of trauma, and you perpetuate the cycles that we're trying to interrupt. And so at the end of the day, I found ways to package that into language that'll get me funding is really what I do, Hildy. That's really what I do.
Thank you for telling me.
So this is going to be a conversation where I think we're going to be learning a ton from you. And part of the objective of
it goes both ways.
Yes, it'll be we'll do mutual learning, but also for our growing audience as well, which as we're looking at the demographics, we have a lot of nonprofit leaders, business leaders, philanthropy, et cetera, really trying to share some of the different thinking strategies, approaches, and sort of unveiling some of this things that I think are sometimes a lot of your work for me, it resonated as instinctual, in terms of how I feel. And then sometimes with barriers to how others approach, and so I find myself sometimes bucking up against that. But in the this is now the 15th episode, I think, that we've found. There's been this really great thread of exactly what catalytic thinking and what creating your future has been doing. Is I think it's just a great an additional thread in this series of conversations of like putting people first, deep democracy, and really flipping the paradigm that I have hope and faith more people are willing to engage in conversation on. So
we'll do the formal introduction.
Yeah. This is what happened. We have the podcast before the podcast, and then we get going. So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So,
I totally get it.
Everyone, welcome in. Thank you for joining us on The Ripple Effect. We are here with a special guest, but before we go there, my co-host, Marybeth Campbell from Worcester Community Action Council.
Welcome, everybody.
Is here. Welcome you in. And we are so excited. We found out about our next guest from VU-LA, and we couldn't be more happy to talk with Hildy Gottlieb. We don't typically read the full bio, but Hildy, your bio is so decorated. I feel that for our listeners, we owe them
Go deep. Yeah.
truth of everything that goes on here. So Hildy Gottlieb is a futurist, a social scientist, and an asker of powerful questions. She is the co-founder at Creating the Future and the developer of Catalytic Thinking, the framework for creating a future different from our past that is the basis for all creating the future's work. Hildy is a TEDx speaker and a contributor to the Stanford Social Innovation Review and Nonprofit Quarterly. She also created and hosted the Making Change podcast, where she interviewed leaders from around the world about the factors that create powerful, positive change. All Hildy's work is rooted in a combination of research and practical experience, built upon her decades as a consultant, a social change theorist, and a serial social entrepreneur. Hildy helped develop the current master's degree program in community leadership at Duquesne University, where she and her partner, Dimitri Petropoulos, taught as professors. The team also co-founded the world's first diaper bank, sparking the diaper banking movement across North America, garnering them points of light citation from President Bill Clinton. In addition to teaching at Duquesne University, Hildy has lectured at universities around the world, including the University of Waikato in Hamilton, New Zealand, and at both the Haas School of Business and the Masters in Development Practice Program at UC Berkeley. Hildy's best-selling books on the nuts and bolts of social change have all become industry standards and are used as texts in both undergraduate and graduate programs around the world. When not working, Hildy can be found in the garden, at the movies, shooting photos, or traveling the world in search of a quiet cafe.
Which I'm also very interested in at the end of this conversation is where are those quiet cafes? We'll get to that. But I know one of the things we all have in common is that, and I know, Hildy, you describe yourself this way, but we are all boundary pushers, which is why we're having these conversations. Ron fancies himself a disruptor, and I think I'm putting myself in that category too. But as nonprofits, sometimes we find that hard to do. And so some of your work, I think, is really inspirational, and I think, the vision that you've had that you're executing this past 10 years in particular has been really incredible to read about and learn about. So we're excited to share that with people today.
Hildy, so were you always a habitual line stepper from the time you were young, or did you develop that later? Were you the kid that was like, all right, that's what they said immediately, I'm pushing it?
Yeah, I'm not somebody who ever fit in. I'm not sure if I'm the square peg or the round peg that's not fitting in whatever. But I've never been able to answer the standard questions with the standard answers.
Great. Well, this will make today's conversation great. So one of the things that we like to do inconsistently with our guests, aside from telling dad jokes, which if you have any jokes, you feel free to share them. But Ron and I ourselves have also done this, just tell a little bit of our origin stories. And there's no definition to that. You can share whatever you like to share, whether it's career-oriented, personal experiences, but whatever has shaped you to be where you are exactly sitting today.
Wow. I'll choose two. I will choose the origins of what I'm doing right now at Creating the Future. But probably the more important in my life, thank you, Ron, for reminding me of everything I've done, or many of the things that I've done in my life. I would give up all of that to have been the mom to my daughter. I am a mom first and foremost. I was a single mom almost her entire life. and have this amazing grown daughter who makes my life worth living every day. So that's number one. Number two is my social change stuff. Interestingly, the social change stuff started before Lizzie and runs through when she was 15 or 16. She came to me and she said, my friends their parents are all telling them they need to learn to be responsible for themselves. She said, you've told me I'm responsible for the whole world. It's like, well, honey, you are. So that is my kid who is just an amazing force in my life. She is right now working in Hollywood, in the entertainment industry. And so yeah, that's part A. Part B, which sort of is the donut that surrounds that, is the social change bent. I grew up with the TV on and the Vietnam War and the boys coming home, primarily boys in coffins. And that was on every night. And that was, and the civil rights movement. And that certainly shaped me. I was not old enough at that time to be out protesting, but I was old enough to be shaped by it. And, over time, I've done a lot of different things, but I'll move us forward to the early 90s, where my then business partner and now husband and I started consulting, taking all of the skills that we had over our lives and started consulting to community organizations. And after about 5 years, we hit sort of that facepalm moment where this is the mid 90s, late 90s. There's not a lot of internet. There's not a lot of marketing that you can do globally. And yet we're working all over the continent. We're working across Mexico and Canada and the US. We are communicating with colleagues and teaching via that communication all over the world. So you're supposedly great at what you do. You don't work by referral as consultants unless you're great at what you do. And we sort of looked at each other and said, okay, if we're so good, how come none of the groups we're working with are actually creating the change that they have the potential to create? We changed our lives to step into consulting to make the world a better place. That was our only goal. We want the world to be a better place. And what we saw over and over again were consulting clients. Now, we were not working with huge organizations. We always chose to work with small, primarily grassroots organizations, but they were consistently facing the same question in different ways. And that was, we sense we can create so much more change, and yet something's stopping us. And the knee jerk, the easy one is, if only we had more money, if only we had a better board. I think that should be the theme song of this sector. If only we had more money, if only we had a better board. But they would get more money and they would get a better board and they were still frustrated. And so as consultants, we had been doing the work the way you're supposed to. We've been doing strategic planning the way everybody does strategic planning. We've been doing governance the way they've been teaching governance since the 60s. We were doing resource development the way everybody does it. And what we started doing, through the lens I have now, I realized that what we started doing was changing the questions we were asking our clients. And it was just trial and error. I wish I could tell you that we did a whole lot of research. Again, no internet, or very, very little internet. Did a whole lot of research on what is it that changes the world. The reality is there wasn't. Even if there was an internet, type it in right now, and you'll go get a grant and do whatever. And so when we started changing the questions we were asking, we found that there were questions that led people to their creativity, to their excitement, to energy, to wanting to know what other groups were doing. And so if those were the result, we kept asking those questions. There were other questions we would ask that led to scarcity and fear, and that'll never work. And so we stopped asking those questions. What we learned later on, far later on, was what we were actually doing was a massive experiment in brain science. that there are questions that we ask that routinely lead us to our best selves, and there are questions that we ask that routinely trigger the reflexive part of the brain that really is incapable of thought. Mm-hmm. And that's that whole fear survival center, which by design, you don't want it thinking. You want it running away, right, or freezing. Yeah. You really don't want it thinking. Well, all of those routine questions that we were so used to asking were all triggering the part of the brain that not only doesn't think, but leads us directly to, no, stop, that's bad. By the time we looked up about, 7, 8, 10 years later, we were no longer doing our work the way anybody does it. And with these small organizations, we were starting to see shifts. Again, they weren't changing the world. They were tiny groups, and we were just 2 people. But we were seeing them change. Problems that have been problems internally forever were gone. And the way that they were addressing community, the way that they were including community in their conversations, the way that they were planning to actually create change in their communities, was dramatically different. And so we decided we need to share this. We need to tell the world about this. At the time, I wrote a book of what we had learned so far. This was 2008 or so, called The Pollyanna Principles, which were basically principles that we found routinely led to change. And we said, we need to teach this. And the teaching of it, and again, we were still just consultants. Our consulting colleagues around the world were asking us, okay, how are you getting these results? We're not seeing this. How are you getting this? And so that's what we taught. We said, we're in Tucson, Arizona. Come to Tucson. We'll play together for 4 or 5 days. We'll share with you everything we've learned. And that eventually became Creating the Future. And the methodology, the questions that so consistently bring out the best in people and in situations which lead to change, that became the Catalytic Thinking framework, which is a question-based framework that helps shift our mindsets. And I can talk a little bit about that mindset shift, but Creating the Future's mission really has been to demonstrate the power of these questions, both through teaching and having our students demonstrate the power, bring all of those stories back, and doing demonstration projects. And then to make this framework ubiquitous, to make these questions, just as we've got questions that we are so used to answering that we don't even realize that there's a choice to ask a different question, we want to make these the normal questions. And so that's my meandering story of how I got to where I am. And yeah, thank you for asking.
No, that tracks with everything that I thought the conversation would be about. And thank you for going into that. I'm really fascinated to learn more in here. True entrepreneurial, right? Like I'm jumping in, I'm figuring out as we go, refine and iterate and refine and go. But a lot of what you're talking about is what we endeavor to do on an individual level with our participants. Having a background in transformational coaching as well, really looks at helping them create an unprecedented future. And so it shifts the mindset from thinking about, right? There's also another great book. I don't know if you're familiar with Steve Zaffron and Dave Logan's 3 Laws of Performance. It's a really great book. And the 3 laws for them are the way the world occurs for people, people perform in direct accordance with the way the world occurs for them. The law number 2 for them is that the way the world occurs for people arises in language. And then our last law is that future-based language can transform current reality. And so in some ways, loosely using that and helping our participants, so when they come out of incarceration, right, you think about that scarcity mindset, the first thing I'll ask them something along the lines of, so what is it that you want to do? What are you thinking of? And they'll say, I don't want to go back to jail. And for me, I'm like, that is such a low bar. And so how do we help them start to dream a new dream? And so a lot of our work is question-based, Socratic in nature, but haven't seen it done on a organizational scale that you're doing with creating the future. And so I'm really fascinated at how these parallels go together.
Yeah, I think as I've been in this position, it'll be 5 years in a month. And, not that I have just come to this realization, but for me, I just keep saying to myself, it's the people, dummy. And so, we're community action, that's our orientation. But if I actually think about our day-to-day operation of how we engage and hear community voice, we have work to do in that. But in some ways, that part, I'm not suggesting is easy whatsoever, but that engagement with clients and that one-to-one interaction, the relationship building it's much more simple. The challenges, I think, is the systems change component of the influencers and the many masters we serve relative to our funders and the bureaucracy that, where's the shift up in that? And that's where I'm curious in terms of the work that you're doing, Hildy, in creating the future and the specifics to the catalytic thinking is what are the questions that you are seeing? What's the old question versus the new question you're asking? And what are you seeing in terms of not only how it's influencing the organization and the operations and the programmatic aspect and the philosophy, but really shifting upwards, that managing up in some ways.
Dovetailing that, is it transforming the people?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Ultimately, that's where the impact is. Yeah.
Okay, so that was about 12 questions.
Welcome to the ripple effect. We just ask one question and then let you talk for 50 minutes. That's basically what happens. Yeah,
we throw a rock and then it ripples.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the whole premise.
Yes. It's awesome. It's awesome. First of all, I am I'm a sociologist by nature. I'm a social science researcher and theorist by nature. Which is a nice way of saying geek. I am massively geeky about this stuff. And over and over and over again, researchers since they've been studying movements have shown that organizations are helpful to movements, but movements are what create change. And there's an old adage, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. Part of my story that I did not share in my very long meandering path is that I have a political science and economics degree and got my first job working for an elected official. And I had always thought I wanted to run for office.
We have that in common.
And working for an elected official. Working for an elected official cured me of that.
Yeah. Yes. Agreed. Yep. We also have that in common.
I just had to interface with him a couple times.
Yes. Yeah. Get it.
What I found is that elected office is on a bad day where change goes to die, and on a good day it follows what the mass of people have said is important to them. And so if I wanted to be leading change, I needed to be working with the people. I have since repeated over and over and over again that change happens in people's living rooms. It doesn't happen in organizations. It happens in people's living rooms. And we can help that. We can help make that happen, or we can stand in the way of it. We can become part of the problem. Or we can really smooth that path. And so part one of my answer to what does it take to change systems is to see ourselves as part of community and not as the leader of the charge, but to be stepping in line with what our community wants. And we're not great at that. That is systemic. A big part of my personal focus these days is the fact that systemically within the nonprofit social change ecosystem, we're not set up to create systems change.
Wait a second. You said we're not set up to create the change?
We're not. We're actually set up to pretty much perpetuate what exists. And let me go into that a little bit. All of the systems and structures that we all follow And it really doesn't matter what part of the ecosystem you're in. It's nonprofit, it's social enterprise, it's government. We all pretty much have the same structures. They come from strategic planning comes right out of the military. The hierarchical nature of our board, staff, blah, 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 comes out of the military. Our program design comes out of thousands of years of church charity, where the church decided who was deserving, decided what they were deserving of, was serving one person at a time. They certainly were not about systems change because they were the system.
Wow.
And so what do we do in our program design? We serve one person at a time. We have an application because we decide if you're deserving or not. I mean, and then all the rest of our systems come out of the business world. So what we have are systems that we have cobbled together. The business world being the place where this entire organization-centric model comes from, where the goal of a business is to survive,
right,
and to thrive and to create profit and to knock out the competition. Well, in social change, if we're constantly knocking out the competition, which is what we're taught to do,
right?
Which is if you take a marketing class, they're going to ask you, how are you different than your competition, which we've labeled competition.
They set it up.
Rather than
they set up the paradigm from the beginning.
So the people that could link arms with us to say, wow, we are all about child safety. We are all about food security. We are all about pick your thing, literacy. We're all about that. We need to all be working together. No, we are taught how to differentiate ourselves from them, to see them as our competition, and to figure out how we're different than them and better than them. And you put all of that together, and basically what we are following is systems that are rooted in power and privilege. And we are trying to dismantle systems of power and privilege using systems of power and privilege. It is the tools of the master's house.
That's profound.
And so when I look at where does systems change happen, I really believe we need to look inside our own selves first. We need to look at the ways in which the work that we are doing is actually perpetuating harm. And it's not just, and it all comes from the questions we ask. It all comes from the questions that our work is answering. And I can share just a little bit about why we focus so much on questions, but that's really, in my mind, the heart of, if we're going to address systems change, we need to look in our own house first and really rethink the very, very core questions that our work is answering.
Hildy, in your years of work and observations, in the act of self-reflection of an organization, assuming that they're doing that because they reached out to you, right? And asked for your help. In their self-reflection and actualization, are there common points of where like that aha moment happens where it's like, wait a minute, we are part of the problem. We think we're part of the solution. We have this menu of services and menus of programs that we offer to people, and that client comes back every year. I say that to my staff all the time. Like, how long has somebody
Right.
part of our fuel assistance program? Like, where do we break that? And how do we do that? What is there a common moment where an organization is committed to that change that you see? Is there something that happens? Is it an aha moment? Is it a process? What have you seen as a common observation in that?
Well, first I need to start with the fact that we're not consultants. We are providing capacity building to people who may be doing that work. So while we've done demonstration projects with organizations, and we see ourselves as a demonstration project because we're an organization, we don't get into the nitty gritty very, very much of organizational change, with the exception of advocating for it. And sharing the observations that lead people to their own ahas. The demonstration projects that we've done are all people saying, can you help us apply catalytic thinking to this thing we have going on? So it has really been more proof of concept around catalytic thinking as a framework rather than the systems change piece. That said, when we change the questions we're asking and answering, it changes systems. So I'll share with you why we focused on questions and why catalytic thinking is all about the questions. We do so much work in the social change ecosystem around trying to decide what to do, what actions to take. The whole field of social innovation is around, well, this didn't work. What should we do that's different? And we're constantly trying to do something new. Funders are always looking for something new that you're doing. If we don't change the thinking that goes into that doing, though, we're going to keep getting the same results. Right. And so that's what we keep doing, is we keep changing the doing without going upstream to change the thinking that's going into that doing. And what we realized is that all of those assumptions and beliefs that comprise all of that doing, they're really answers to questions we don't even realize we're being asked. And systems are the answers to questions. What should we do? What should be the norm? How do we go about, what do we do if somebody messes up? What do we do to reward people? Those are all systems questions. All of the things that we believe, all of the assumptions that we have are actually the answers to questions. The simplest one is the world flat or is it round? It's really the answer to the question, what's going to happen if I go out there?
Right.
And so I believe the world is round. I believe the world is flat. Either way, it's the answer to the question, if I keep going, am I going to fall off? And so we focus on the questions because what we found is that the questions, and again, it was that divergence in our initial inquiry some of these questions are causing harm. Mm-hmm. Some of these questions are causing fear. Some of these questions are causing people to shut down, and we keep asking them as if they're the norm.
Right.
So I'll give you the most basic example in the entire social change ecosystem. What is the problem, and how will you solve it? Right? Every grant you've ever seen, everything
140 characters. Please describe how you're going to solve this problem.
Not words, characters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got to delete that comma.
Spaces included.
Yeah.
Yes.
Reduce that.
Reword it. Yeah. What is the problem and how will we solve it? And I loved what you said earlier, Ron, because the question that's more powerful is, what is the future that you want to create and what needs to be in place for you to have a hand in creating that? And you can't create the future that we want without starting where we are and working through the problem. So it's not, a rosy future instead of solving the problem. No, we have to solve the problem. But where we're aiming when we look at social change by asking, what is the problem and how will you solve it, is exactly where you were going, Ron, when you said that somebody who gets out of prison, that the first thing they say is, I don't want to go back. We are absolutely focused on what we don't want. What is the problem? Rather than what we do want. And the work that you're doing is aiming. I love those questions that you shared, because that is all aiming at what we do want rather than what we don't want. What are the barriers? What are the obstacles? And when I ask you, what is the problem and what are the barriers to accomplishing that? My survival brain has gone, this is going to be too hard.
Yeah.
The barriers are high, the obstacles are high, the challenges are multiple. But what do we do in a SWOT analysis? We ask about your weaknesses, we ask about your threats. We are so focused on the negative, and we are constantly triggering that part of the brain that is incapable of language and thought. If we're asking, what does the future look like if we're successful? And what are the steps? What are the dominoes we need to lay? What are the conditions that will lead to that change? Then we can start to create that.
I start to build on that.
We don't have to question. We're not even going to get there. Go ahead, Ron. I'm sorry.
I love it, because what we build on also, I do some work and consulting with some folks. I'm learning so much here as well. But I help people focus on what way of being will help you accomplish that. I don't care what you do, right? And so your framework of the doing, I really focus on that of be, do, have. Because if you determining on who you're going to be right? I was talking with one of the guys that was consulting, and he's trying to connect with one of his coworkers, and he's like, I keep asking her this, and she won't. And I went and watched the whole Taylor Swift Eras tour so I could relate. And I was like, well, that's fascinating. You did all that. That's great work, but maybe you didn't need to do all that, you know. But if you wanted to connect with this person more, what could you do? And he was like, I'd ask her a question. All right, so to ask her a question, what would you need to be? And need to be curious. Right, because if you're curious, what are you going to do? You're going to ask a question. And if you ask that question and you're curious, then you have an infinite amount. You'll have a lot of knowledge. So what do you need to be? Right? And so first framing out what is that future, and then who is it that you need to be? And so this is where I was coming back to an individual thing. And I'm curious about in this work, when you start looking at systems change, to what degree does it become personal for the people that are there? Because as an individual, if I'm rooted in my own ego and a scarcity mindset that I have to hold this position, I can't yet see that there's a future that I could be a part of to produce for someone else because I'm so confined in holding on to this limited space that I have. And so shifting that, and I'm sure that comes from your educational background, you have some things on that, but I'm wondering at what point does this become leadership? Somewhere in there, an individual's like, okay, I have to shift my way of being, the way that I and then collectively we show up in this space. Does that, I see you're nodding, does that happen? When does that, how does that happen or distill down to the individual within the work?
All change is personal change, period. All change. There is no such thing as an organization. We have created this construct. We are a group of people. There's no such thing as a board. There are a whole bunch of board members. All change is personal change. And catalytic thinking is not really a framework for organizational development. It is a framework for a different way of a way of shifting our mindset about life. My husband and I use catalytic thinking when we're getting ready for a trip. We use it for everything. We've all experienced this. You're getting ready for a wonderful vacation and you're making all the plans for how the vacation is going to be fabulous. And the week before the vacation, as you are prepping for the vacation, you're at each other's throats because you got to get on the plane by a certain amount of time. You got to get back, and you're always packing too much and you're always packing too little. And we realized that by the time we would get on the plane, we would be like, okay, we're going to take the next week and just try and get back to zero.
Right, yeah.
And so we started to ask the question, what would good look like in the prep? What do we want the prep for the trip to make possible for us? And you talked about the being. What are the conditions that need to be in place for us to be at our best during that week?
Wow.
What do we need to be? What do we need to have? What do we need to know? What do we need to experience? Those are all conditions questions. And Marybeth, you started earlier on talking about the fact that it's always about the people. It's always about the people. Social change is not about money. Social change is not about organizations. Social change is about people. And what that means is, what does it take to bring out the best in the people? Well, the first thing it takes is to include them.
Yeah.
And so we're not very good at, again, sector-wide, we're not very good at that.
That there's great irony in that truth. Yes. Yeah. That we're here in this idea of for people rather than centering with,
it's part of, we've talked about this before in previous episodes, as our organization has grown from 3 of us to now 8 of us. It's something that I'm aware of as a leader and keenly aware of, and I watch it, and it's really fascinating to hear you unpack it in the way you are, Hildy, because one of my greatest concerns, or I keep my eye on, is not wanting to become an organization that exists just to keep the machine running.
Mm-hmm.
Because at some point, that's what happens, right? Like you're just around to survive because you have, and part of it is real. There's a responsibility you feel. There's folks that work and you take some of the money that comes in, takes care of their families and their personal relationships. We work on difficult things. And so you feel an obligation to make sure that you can continue to provide for those folks that do such great work. But at the same time, to your framework is really, really fascinating to me because is it really about creating the change? And so it made me think about, I'm working on some research with WPI right now, specifically around returning citizens and trying to support them. We have a pilot transitional employment program we're working on. And the conversation around cost per unit came up because I want to work with a small cohort of men for an extended period of time because I'm looking at the transformation of the individual, not just the outcome. And so they were concerned that our cost per unit was up around $30,000 per person, which I had to juxtapose against the cost in Massachusetts to incarcerate someone is 5 times that.
Yeah.
So how is it that you present me that this opportunity to
costly.
help and ultimately for our organization is, I'm proud to say that 6 of our employees are returning citizens. I want the whole thing to be run by them. They'll do it way better than I can. I just had some access and can talk a little bit, and I just want to help get out of the way. But being able to fund that movement, you've got me thinking differently than not just the money. What else is there to help perpetuate this? But where I was going with my question was, when you're up against intersecting systems like this, so as you shift, but you're dealing with some real entrenched systems that you intersect with. If I'm looking at it metaphorically as gears, these gears are just stuck, and I'm ready to go. I see I've gotten some lube, and I'm ready to turn, but these things are so entrenched and stuck. What wisdom would you share in those respects as you've helped some of these social movements and all over the world, the folks you've worked with, to specifically change?
We are stuck in systems. We are stuck in systems, again, that were not intended to create systemic change. I just want to sit for a moment with cost per unit because okay, so we can move beyond. But when we're talking about the fact that it's always about the people,
not units.
The first time they said unit to me, the first time that someone said unit to me, I literally was confused. I was new to the nonprofit sector. I was in a room and they had asked, I was a assistant director, and they had asked the director, how many units did we serve? And I looked over and I was like, what are they talking? What are we shipping? What did we do? And he was like, no, that's the number of folks. And so I'm with you.
Yeah.
How dehumanizing.
Yeah. So the toughest thing to change is the big institutional government funders. That said, it's not impossible if we start having conversations. What we don't realize is that these systems that we're up against are also people.
Yep.
And is it going to be? Are we going to bat 1,000? No. Are we going to? Are we going to strike out most of the time? Yes. Are we going to have one person that gets it and can make a little change? Yeah. I am a huge fan of finding where the water's warm and going where the water's warm. If there are funding systems that can support doing things that are more life-giving than calling us units. But the focus has got to be on people. And so the more you can include more people in the work you're doing, the less you're dependent on the one that happens to have the contract that you're doing. And it's just a transition. So coming back to being a mom, when Lizzie was little, the only, if you guys have had kids, you watch a video over and over and over again until you're just ready to choke. And we watched The Muppets Take Manhattan 9.
That's great. It's a great show.
Mine was Thomas the Tank Engine, the movie. Thomas the Tank Engine, the movie was mine. As soon as it went off, we put it back on. Why? Why are we doing this?
That's why I don't like the NFL, because it would preempt the Muppets on Sundays.
Yeah, and you can't preempt the Muppets. My daughter is now spending a lot of time with her niece, and she says, she's watching Bluey. She says, but I make sure she gets Muppets.
Yeah, Bluey's all their age.
I raised her well. But in The Muppets Take Manhattan, they're putting on a Broadway show. And Kermit just keeps getting the sense that something is missing. And finally, one of them, I don't know, maybe Fozzie Bear, comes up to him and says, is it okay if the bears and the elephants watch in the audience? And Kermit says, no, that's what's missing. They need to be in the show. And I always think of that is we treat our communities like they're audiences.
Yeah.
And we need them in the show. And the very, very first question of catalytic thinking is who will be affected by whatever you are considering, and what will it take for them to lead the direction you take? Way different question. Yeah. And what's interesting about all of the questions in catalytic thinking is they seem very innocuous and very safe at the beginning. Who will be affected by everything that you're going to do? Well, of course we need to know who's going to be affected. But who's going to lead the direction that you take?
Yeah.
Maybe not so much. We at Creating the Future, and I'm reflecting on the question that you had posed, Ron, talking about the fact that people see their job as perpetuating, which again is a business thing. Creating the Future, when we started to really get going, we've been around since 2011, got our C3 in 2013. And at the beginning of 2017, we decided that we are going to have a 10-year mission, that we want to accomplish everything that we can accomplish for making this framework ubiquitous within 10 years and go home. And what that meant is halfway through that, we looked up and went, okay, we've done a lot of demonstrating that this works. We do not need proof of concept anymore. Both the work that Dimitri and I had done prior to forming Creating the Future, and then when we really had the framework and we're really going, we don't need to prove this anymore. What do we do in the next 5 years? And so we spent 6 months engaging our community in those questions, asking them the catalytic thinking questions. Because what would we normally do? We would normally say, let's go to the normal way. We've got 5 years left of our mission. We need a strategic plan, we would say. Let's get the board together and key staff, because usually we don't include all the staff in planning. Most of the time, we don't even include all staff in board meetings. So now let's think about that question. Who'll be affected by what we're about to do? We don't even include them in board meetings when boards are making decisions about staff. So we usually have 20, 30, maybe if you're in a great position, 50 people creating the strategic plan for the next 5 years of Creating the Future when our reach is global. So how often do we do that? A food bank that has their strategic plan done by their board, their key staff on behalf of 3 million people in a population. Yeah. So who is actually leading the direction that this organization takes? And so we asked just the exact same questions we would have asked we don't even call it strategic planning anymore. We call it community impact planning. The questions we would have asked in a community impact plan, we asked of our community. We got and these were not tick box answers. These were not multiple choice. These were talk about the benefit that you would want to see continue. Talk about what you see our mission could make possible for people. Talk about the conditions you think people need to have. What do they need to know? What do they need to feel in order for that to become reality? And that is what is driving us. Everything that we learned from our community, we pulled together, and our job was to turn it into action. So the thinking was done by our community. The action will be done by us. Figuring out how to they were very clear about the direction. They were very clear about the benefit that they want us to provide. They were very clear about what they thought needed to be in place for that. And our job is to put that into action. We've watched that happen with a food bank we did a demonstration project with. Same thing. They spent a year engaging their partner organizations, their clients, their staff, their community in these exact questions. And when it came time to prioritize which actions should we take, they pulled community members together. During COVID, outside, masked, 100 people came together to prioritize which actions the food bank should take. So again, once you start doing that and you start seeing yourself as part of community rather than the phrase that makes my blood go crazy, we're going to go, quote, out to the community. Mm-hmm. As if we're in here and they are out there, and we're going to go out to the community and ask them. And that's the language that we frequently use. I mean, again, getting back to those 3 points that you shared, Ron, it's all embedded in our language. And so what we said is okay, this is our community. Tell us what should be next. Tell us where we can be of the most service. Once you start doing that, you're starting to build a movement. You are starting to tap into what your community wants. And if you can see yourselves as part of a movement, not leading the movement, but part of a movement, that shifts conversation, that shifts energy, and eventually it shifts funding.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Putting it in perspective, and we're so scarcity driven in this sector systemically. Yeah. We're not choosing scarcity. We are systematically forced into scarcity that we don't even see outside that very narrow realm of how do I change this funder upon whom I am reliant.
On a macro, though, isn't that America? We're rooted in scarcity. I pit you against you. Everything's a zero sum. If I get, you can't have. If you get more, I get less. Instead of looking at things like the sum of us, which really does a brilliant job mapping out that it benefits all of us. It's interesting because in some ways, I think about to what degree it's no longer a logical argument, but it's a spiritual one, maybe a soul level shift. It isn't cognitive anymore. I can present to you data, information, and we know that doesn't create the shift or the change. It's in the relationship, it's in the connection, it's in what you're describing. It's in the courage to get off of ourselves and relate deeply with one another that we haven't really done well.
Well, that's where I think if I put I'm an employer hat on, right? So in that relationship building is what I'm seeing in some of our work that we're doing, and you're doing a lot of similar work in the employer relationship, that individual development plan is the push almost over the line of where we're asking people to reach into their social emotional intelligence also and their IQ of coming to this conclusion also that they are people within a set of other people working together rather than just for a community but with, and it requires a much deeper level of communication, relationship building, trust, much more sense of belonging and inclusion, that it just pushes us way out of the comfort zone that if you're generationally different, you and I have talked about this. I feel like we're the last generation of people that have gone to work of like, this is what you do. You go to work and you don't bring your life into it. And, I think you and I are different in that way. We're trying to flatten that hierarchy a little bit and just be our vulnerable selves. But we're asking people also to bring their vulnerability to the table too, in order to then self-reflect, actualize, so that we can flip this model. I mean, what Hildy, what you're saying and what Vu has also talked about, and a lot of our guests are talking about, is like, we've never mind the systems change, never mind change, inverting. We've got to throw this out. We have to recondition our thinking and throw out this, military-driven, business-driven. Eric Estevez in episode 6 talked about sort of the idea that our board members that are often corporate volunteers are trying to apply corporate principles to change in our organization, that doesn't always reflect and mirror well or effectively because of that. And even this idea of the moving from scarcity to, I think what you call it, Mildy, enoughness, is this pitting and this oversaturation concept that we talk about all the time, that's driven by funders being like, no, you have to prove that you're better than this so we can eliminate this one and not write 2 checks, write 1 check. But that it requires at the end of it this a willingness to overcome the fear and move out of our comfort zone into vulnerability and tap into that neuroscience that has not been the traditional role of an employer to pull that out of people per se.
No, but we know it's happening. Like I started the conversation, not just the young men I work with, but all of us have been wounded in our family systems. Yeah. And all those wounds play out in relationships everywhere.
It brings in all the supervising of employees and all of that.
It plays out in all of that. And if kudos to the movement and those that are willing to accept it for the overall well-being. But we keep pushing the tide, and we got wonderful folks like Hildy out there who have put together this wonderful framework and have agreed to come on with us. We are approaching the end of our time together.
I feel like we didn't scratch the surface.
We'll have to have you back on.
We need a 2.0. We need another 4 hours with you.
As we part, what wisdom would you share to our listeners? And we've got folks that are, VCs, philanthropists, grassroots nonprofits all over. What would you share to folks that are just listening in today about what do you have to share? You got the platform.
First, it's the acknowledgement that pretty much everybody within the social change ecosystem at this point is looking for change. We keep us and theming, and the easiest us and them is funders versus the rest of us. But so many foundation leaders and government funders really, really do want to see change happen. So, it's always about the people. Relate to people as people. Get to know people as people. And the easiest way to do that is not wagging our fingers and telling people they're wrong and screaming and yelling. The easiest way to do that, which any of us can do, is to just change the questions that we're asking. A simple question, and any of us has the power to ask a different question. You do not need positional authority to ask a different question. And we can ask different questions in our staff meetings. We can start our staff meetings by asking different questions. We can ask different questions in our families. And all of us have that power to create change in ways that we don't even realize we're doing it. One-on-one, one at a time, and then eventually in large groups.
Hildy, we need many more hours with you. We hope you'll come back and talk to us again. I feel like we have so much, so we can go even deeper and deeper and deeper in so many things, but we want to make sure that we're definitely going to share your information in our show notes. I know there are people out there that are going to be asking a lot of questions, and we're starting up a hotline soon, which we're excited about, so we can answer people's questions. So I know things will come out of that, and we just really appreciate your time coming from another time zone to us and sharing your experience and expertise with us, and just giving us goodwill and desire to make change ourselves. So we appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. It's been dope, Hildy. I appreciate you. Yes,
too.
absolutely.
Yeah, the connection. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully it's beautiful out there in Arizona as it is here.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to The Ripple Effect. We appreciate you. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and tune in next time.
And check out Creating the Future. Good stuff. All right. Thank you very much.
You're listening to The Ripple Effect, a nonprofit imperative with Waddell and Marybeth Campbell. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you on the next one.